Tonight on Bridge City News, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney speaks out about Ottawa's second approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. The wildfires in northern Alberta have caused thousands of more people to evacuate. And a life-saving spray will be making its way to hundreds of boys and girls clubs across the country.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says he's happy Ottawa has again approved construction of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, but it is not enough. He says he will not celebrate until the project, which could triple capacity of the existing line, is built.
The Government of Alberta will do everything we can to support immediate construction and real progress. This is now a test for Canada to demonstrate to the world that we're a safe place in which to invest, create jobs, and build infrastructure. This is a test for whether Canada truly is an economic union, where we can dream big and still do big things. This is a test for our economic future, because right now, without market access to global energy markets, we are massively underselling one of our country's greatest assets.
Kenney also says he hopes BC Premier John Horgan will stop fighting the project once and for all. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, says even though the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion has been given the green light once again, he does not think it'll happen.
I have to say I'm not optimistic, Hal. As I wrote in my recent column on this, I said the only people that will get work from this are lawyers. Justin Trudeau, when he made the announcement, the PM's, he stood there and he said it will be this construction season. When pressed on it during his news conference, he said construction will begin this summer. There's permits to be had, but it's going to be this summer. I simply don't believe it.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Lilly, not only discussing the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, but how Justin Trudeau's carbon tax must double for Canada to meet its 2030 Paris targets. That's coming up after Business News. Hundreds of people gathered in downtown Vancouver to protest Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. These protesters were not happy.
Less than 24 hours after declaring a climate emergency, this government went ahead and approved the Trans Mountain Pipeline, a 20% expansion in emissions from Alberta's tar sands. I thought we could do a couple chants and make sure Trudeau can hear us all the way in Ottawa. So when I say no, you say pipeline. No! Pipeline! No! Pipeline! When I say no, you say tankers. No! Tankers! No! Tankers!
Advancing flames from wildfires have forced the evacuation of more than 9,000 people in northern Alberta. The areas include Lacrete, Beaver First Nation, along with portions of Mackenzie County and the Peerless Trout First Nation. People in High Level, meanwhile, who were allowed to return home about a week ago, remain on evacuation alert and could be told to leave quickly if the wildfire situation gets worse. Fire officials say more rain and cooler temperatures are needed to help the firefighters battle the blazes. The largest being the Chuck Egg Creek fire is now over 270,000 hectares in size. Close to 700 boys and girls clubs across the country will be receiving a free supply of an opioid overdose reversing drug. The youth group announced a 3-year partnership with Adapt Pharma Canada, which produces naloxone. The nasal spray will be available through after-school programs, emergency shelters, group homes, and high schools. Those who work at the Lethbridge and District Boys and Girls Club say having naloxone on hand can be a lifesaver.
Powerful to be able to have the skills and knowledge to potentially save somebody's life, and as a member of the community, I always want to look out for other people that are going through a crisis situation and hopefully save a life at the end of the day. We have our staff trained in naloxone, so Arches came into our organization a year ago and trained all of our staff on how to administer naloxone, and we've luckily never had to administer naloxone on any participants in our program, but our staff is well prepared if a situation did happen.
Alberta Health Services says naloxone kits are free of charge and are also available at the Safe Injection Site Arches, any walk-in clinic, or at a pharmacy. A 3-year-old boy died after suffering injuries on a farm located southwest of Fort Macleod. Police responded to the call just after 12 p.m. on Tuesday. Officials with Alberta Health Services say the boy died as a result of injuries sustained from commercial equipment. A Stars Air ambulance was dispatched to the area, but the boy later died at the scene. RCMP say the incident was accidental and no charges are pending. Earlier today, RCMP issued an Amber Alert for a 7-month-old boy who was abducted from his home in Fairview, Alberta. Police say the toddler, Jamison Sunby, was taken by his father John around 9:45 this morning. The child was found safe and his father is now in custody. Police want to thank the public for their assistance. 2 more rattlesnakes were found at the University of Lethbridge today. As Loris Alexander explains, snake sightings at the U of L are becoming more and more common.
Not 1 but 2 rattlesnakes were caught and released Wednesday morning after it slithered into the University of Lethbridge.
This morning I've picked up a young of the year rattlesnake, which is one that was born last September. And this is one of a few different snakes I've picked up inside of the ULETH building, the University Hall this year.
When I got there, he wanted to come towards me, so somebody says, close the door, keep him out of the loading dock. So I did, but he still came under the door.
Heavy had responded to a call from the university security who said the reptile had fallen through a grate on the 4th floor mechanical room.
University Hall has the mechanical rooms in it, and they steam out and lose heat out into the coulee side. So off of the 6th floor patio, there's kind of the heat release area where they have some steam stacks and a grill over the main mechanical rooms.
It's not extremely common, but this year we've had a few removals. We have had a few in the past, but you don't usually hear of very many. So having 5 up to today makes it a lot.
Heavy Head runs a 24 rattlesnake hotline, safely relocating the venomous creatures during the summer season when they're most active. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The City of Lethbridge is getting closer to becoming its own internet provider. City officials are looking into having an open access network, as many believe Lethbridge is lagging behind other municipalities for both access to internet connectivity and network speed. Trevor Butler, who is the city's GM for information technology, says if the city does not address this gap, it would have an impact on businesses moving to our city. Butler says the city should consider its own fiber optics backbone at a cost of around $8 million. Back in 2016, the CRTC ruled that access to a certain level of internet is a basic right of every Canadian. Critics of Justin Trudeau are being slow to forget the Prime Minister's awkward answer when asked how his own family reduced plastic waste. The stumble came from Trudeau after his government announced plans to ban many single-use plastics. Now, the owner of the Purple Carrot, Chris Robinson, says there are options that are more environmentally friendly than switching to drink box water bottles sort of things.
We need to, I think, have better options than going to boxed water. Over boxed water, I would get a good water filter, and there's some amazing water filters, and use your own water bottle. Very easy to switch your own water bottle. Use your own coffee cup. Every time you get a coffee, that cup is not recyclable, and then you have a plastic lid. Bring your cloth bag to the grocery store for all your groceries. Bring fabric mesh bags for your produce. Use cloth bags instead of Ziploc bags. Use beeswax wraps instead of saran wrap. We have so many things.
A 12-pack of boxed water is better, which is sold in packaging similar to milk cartons, and it retails for about $26. A lot of water cooler chat recently has been about how Prime Minister Justin Trudeau referred to the treatment of our Indigenous people as a genocide. The comments came following the release of the report on murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. So I asked National Post columnist Dr. John Robson, was it really a genocide?
2 essential elements in a genocide. One is there has to be actions that tend to wipe a people out. And second, it has to be deliberate and malicious. And I think that although the situation of Canadian Aboriginals is in many ways very difficult, and the past history is tragic, and there are elements of malice, no Canadian government ever set itself the objective of wiping out First Nations.
Watch the full interview with Dr. Robson as he also discusses how so many Indigenous people are dying. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Some of golf's brightest stars are in Lethbridge. Paradise Canyon Golf Resort is hosting the PGA Canada Mackenzie Tour. Ainsley O'Reilly explains how difficult playing conditions can be in a windy city.
You know what they say about weather in southern Alberta. It's like you blink and suddenly the wind has taken on a new animal. Well, that's the challenge for the PGA Mackenzie Tour athletes this year. Around 3 p.m. Mountain Time, an extreme thunderstorm watch was placed on southern Alberta. This morning, things seemed to be looking fine.
Played here last year, and I love the golf course is fantastic, and it's even better this year. The conditions are really, really good.
And then, heading into the lunch hour, most golfers cleared out, while others stuck around to brave the windy conditions in preparation for the next 2 days.
It's been probably 4 or 5 years, so it's not something you can really get used to.
Jake Knapp is the favorite after winning twice this week, once in Kelowna, BC. He doesn't seem to be fazed by the wind.
I think it'll, change everybody's game a little bit. I don't think, I like to think I'm a pretty good player in the wind, so yeah, just have to be smart about your shot selection, maybe change a few tee clubs and stuff like that, but overall just make the numbers a little higher, so just have to be patient and hit conservative shots.
15 Canadians will appear in the tournament, which isn't surprising to 4-year pro Taylor Pendrith.
The game is definitely improving and getting more popular in Canada. So it's just a matter of time before you see a bunch of Canadians win on the PGA Tour. You've had a couple in the last couple of years, Corey Connors and Mackenzie Hughes. And I think that, all the Americans out here know that the Canadians can compete as well.
Environment Canada predicts rain and even thunder from Wednesday through Friday. So here's hoping the rain holds up for the golfers. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
An internationally acclaimed pianist will be launching this year's Centric Music Fest in Lethbridge. Charles Richard Hamilton will perform this evening in the first of 5 concerts at St. Augustine Church. The event's artistic director dropped by BCN to speak about this evening's upcoming concert.
Centric Music Fest is Southern Alberta's largest summer classical music festival, and tonight we are featuring an internationally known pianist. He's Charles Richard Hamilton. He's originally from Quebec, and he is the only Canadian to have actually be a laureate of that international Chopin competition in Warsaw. So we are extremely lucky to have him. He has an extremely busy touring schedule. Tomorrow he'll be in Edmonton, but tonight at 7:30 p.m. at St. Augustine's Anglican Church, he will be performing works by Chopin, of course, Rachmaninoff, Enescu, who is a Romanian composer, and Debussy.
The festival showcasing top Canadian musicians and rising stars will continue Thursday when Red Deer pianist Alison Kilgannon joins with Trio di Moda for a program of works by Beethoven, Schubert, and Schumann. A torrential downpour caused some major flooding in parts of Swift Current, Saskatchewan yesterday. The city's mayor says close to 8 centimeters of rain mixed with hail fell by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Environment Canada reported closer to 3 centimeters of rain fell near the agency's weather station. The heavy rain caused sewers to back up, entire streets to be flooded, with cars submerged underwater. Infrastructure teams, police, fire, and paramedics worked extra hours to ensure everyone was safe. Some of the water has since receded, and remediation efforts are now underway. South of the border, U.S. President Donald Trump kicked off his 2020 re-election campaign in Orlando, Florida last night. Supporters called Trump's speech electric and fantastic.
It was just electric. It was great. I came over right after work just to get here and took off tomorrow so I could be here.
Fantastic. Great crowd, great speech, great energy, great message, super patriotic. So happy I came.
I thought it was a great beginning to a great re-election campaign. I think he's done an amazing job so far, and the sky's the limit. He's come through on almost every campaign promise he's made so far, and he continues striving to make America great again and keep America great.
Medication withheld, cries for help ignored, and routine checks neglected. Suicides are becoming a problem in many jails across North America. As we find out in this next report, a new examination raises troubling questions about whether the deaths could have been avoided.
Surveillance footage shows an inmate return repeatedly to a closet unlocked by a guard. On his next visit, he hangs himself. Devin Lynch, a former Marine, died at the Cook County Jail in 2016. His family sued the county and in April received a $1.7 million settlement. Lynch's death highlights a disturbing trend. Inmate suicides have become a growing problem in many U.S. jails as more mentally ill and drug-addicted people land behind bars.
This problem has never been as bad as it is today. Jails across the country are being sued. People with mental illness are dying on an almost daily basis.
Jail suicides hit a high of 50 deaths for every 100,000 inmates in 2014, the latest year of government data. The Associated Press and the University of Maryland's Capital News Service examined hundreds of lawsuits involving allegations of mistreatment and the suicide of mentally ill inmates at local jails over the past 5 years. In case after case, jails are accused of refusing inmates medication, ignoring cries for help, imposing harsh conditions, and failing to monitor inmates who might harm themselves.
She had so much more to live for and so much left to do.
Melanie Zumadakis' daughter suffered from mental illness. Tana Jo Fillmore was arrested in November 2016 for violating probation in a drug case. Her family says while in jail, she was denied her prescription medications despite repeated pleas and threats of suicide. On the 9th day, she hanged herself with a bedsheet. The Duchesne County Sheriff declined to discuss the case due to a pending lawsuit.
I want to see change in these jails. I don't want any other parent to do this.
This has a special moment.
In Dane Schickman's case, a son lost his mother. Elizabeth Gaunt, who had a history of mental illness and substance abuse, was acting erratically when she was taken to the Lake County Jail in Northern California in 2015. The 56-year-old former social worker was placed in a sobering cell with a surveillance camera, and she was supposed to be checked every 15 minutes.
She begged multiple times over the course of hours for a medical doctor, for help, and no one in the jail had the humanity to step up or lift a finger to help her.
After 25 hours, she tore a blanket into strips and took her own life. The county settled a wrongful death lawsuit for $2 million.
I don't want to see anybody die under my watch, whether it's somebody that's in custody, whether it's a member of our community. Like I said, I take my obligation, and then my employees take their obligation to make sure that people come in here and they're safe when they're here.
After Gaunt's death, the jail installed larger surveillance monitors, replaced blankets with tear-resistant ones, increased suicide prevention training for staff, and added a registered nurse, among other reforms. John Snook of the Treatment Advocacy Center applauds jailers for taking action, but calls it a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
So the reality, if you want to fix a jail, build more hospital beds.
We'll never give up the fight.
With fewer psychiatric hospitals left in the country, any solutions come too late for parents like Melanie Zumadakis. Terry Che, Associated Press.
We had another severe thunderstorm watch for our region today. More rain and another light show is in the forecast tonight. Complete weather details are coming up. We had brisk winds and showers in many areas of southwestern Alberta today. Tonight, a good chance of a thundershower developing with a low near 6 degrees. Thunder showers again tomorrow with a high of 16. A good chance of rain again on Friday with a high of 15. Showers and 16 for Saturday. The rain should stop for a time on Sunday, bringing more sunshine and a high of 22. Monday and Tuesday, the clouds roll back in with highs reaching 19 degrees for both days. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 23 and an average low of 9. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1985 at 33 degrees, and the record low was +1 in 2004. Sunrise was at 5:23, sunset at 9:42. Let's see how tomorrow's looking across Canada now. Victoria, BC will have showers and a high near 17. Rain and 20 is on tap for Vancouver. Expect light showers and 14 degrees for Calgary on Thursday. Rain and 15 for Edmonton. Showers and 16 for Regina. Showers and 17 for Saskatoon. Increasing cloudiness and 26 degrees for Winnipeg tomorrow. A good chance of rain and 21 is in the forecast for Toronto. Showers and 22 for Ottawa. A good chance of rain and 21 is on tap for Montreal tomorrow. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mainly cloudy and 24. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have periods of drizzle and 21. Charlottetown, PEI will be mainly sunny and 23. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly sunny sky and a high near 18 degrees tomorrow. The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce has thrown its support behind Ottawa's second approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Executive Officer of the Chamber, Cindy Voss, said in a press release today, Alberta's ability to unlock its oil to world markets would contribute to the future of our economic success as a province, but also has positive economic impacts for Lethbridge. The announcement comes on the heels of Vivian Krause's presentation taking place at NMAC Centre tonight, explaining why getting Alberta's oil to Tidewater is economically critical for Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Parliament could be recalled this summer to ratify the new North American Free Trade Agreement. Trudeau flew to Washington today to talk trade, China, and the upcoming G20 summit with U.S. President Donald Trump.
Well, I think one of the things that we say every time we're at various G20s and G7s, when people ask us, why don't you have a bilateral with the president here overseas, we say, well, because we're right next to each other and we see each other all the time. We're obviously going to have a big G20 coming up, and it's an opportunity for us to sit down and talk about China, talk about trade, talk about all the issues that are going to be discussed, the global issues that will be discussed at the G20 next week. But also there'll be a big conversation about the path to ratification of the new NAFTA, and we're going to make sure that we're keeping in step with them. We have an ability to recall Parliament if we need to. We will also make sure that we're monitoring the pace at which the Americans are ratifying it.
The cost of eating fresh vegetables is soaring. There's been almost 17% jump in fresh veggies pricing to help push the annual inflation rate up to 2.4% in May. The increase from April's rate of 2% was the largest since October of last year. Overall, food prices rose 3.5% year over year. Tax revenues from cannabis last year were lower than expected. Now, that's according to the Conference Board of Canada. Stats Canada says governments earned about $186 million in cannabis-related revenue from October 17th, when it was legalized, to March 31st. It says the provinces earned $132 million and Ottawa took in $55 million. Officials say tax revenue took a hit partly due to the bumpy rollout of legislation last fall, but governments can expect strong growth moving forward. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, close to 700 boys and girls clubs across the country will be receiving a free supply of an opioid overdose reversing drug. The youth group announced a 3-year partnership with Adapt Pharma Canada, which produces naloxone. The nasal spray will be available through after-school programs, emergency shelters, group homes, and high schools. Even though Ottawa has given its blessing of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion for the second time, some don't think the project will move ahead. You can include Toronto Sun journalist Brian Lilly in that group. Hear what Mr. Lilly has to say next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come out to the Lethbridge Handmade Market on Saturday, June 22nd at Exhibition Park's main pavilion from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Discover unique finds made by the hands of local artisans. Also, enjoy live music, Kids Create Station, community painting, food trucks, and more. For details, visit lethbridgehandmademarket.ca. So much to see and do on Canada Day. Come celebrate at the Galt Museum as they present an old-fashioned carnival. Taking place from 1 to 4 p.m., enjoy games, entertainment, and free popcorn. There's no cost for admission. For details, visit galtmuseum.com. The Lethbridge Association of the Blind provides numerous activities for the blind and visually impaired in the Lethbridge area. These events include dinners with entertainment, local museum tours, and much more. For more information, call 403-942-1677 or email brownwj@shaw.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The federal government finally made its long-awaited decision in regards to the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. To talk more about it is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly. Brian, the feds finally gave the project the green light. What does that mean for the energy sector and the Canadian economy, and will it actually take place?
Well, this is the second green light for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and I have to say I'm not optimistic, Hal. As I wrote in my recent column on this, I said the only people that will get work from this are lawyers. Justin Trudeau, when he made the announcement, the PM's, he stood there and he said it will be this construction season. When pressed on it during his news conference, he said construction will begin this summer. There's permits to be had, but it's going to be this summer. I simply don't believe it. You've got, even if there were no lawsuits, you've got to get the permits from every municipality that they want to start construction in. The provinces need to approve this. The feds need to actually give construction permits as well. Then on top of that, you've got the lawsuits that are going to be expected from activists who are opposed to this, deathly opposed to this pipeline.
Now, the Prime Minister is still accusing the 6 premiers who are against Bill C-69 and C-48 of threatening national unity. These bills are what the premiers, including Jason Kenney, refer to as anti-energy, Brian.
Yeah, well, this is, the tanker ban bill, the C-48, and C-69 is what the industry calls the No More Pipelines bill. I mean, thankfully, Trans Mountain is through that process, and they don't have to get to it, although I could see a court starting it over again. And if they do, if they have to go through this new process, it will not pass. And I've been told that whether it comes to pipelines, oil and gas projects, forestry, mining, this won't happen. I mean, there were premiers from Manitoba, from Ontario, from New Brunswick, from the Northwest Territories. There's not a lot of oil and gas plays left in Ontario. There's a little bit in Manitoba, especially down in the south with the Bakken field they share with Saskatchewan, North Dakota. But it's not a major industry for them. But they have forestry, they have mining. So does New Brunswick. That's why they signed on. This is going across all our natural resource sectors, and the industries in each one of those sectors worried about these bills. The Prime Minister last week, you and I talked about it, saying they're playing with national unity. He stuck with that theme over the last week. Basically, he's saying if you disagree with him, you're playing with national unity. And yet, as has been exposed, he's the only one who has ever said he would vote for a separatist party. So it's a bit rich for him. It'll be interesting to see what it becomes like in terms of how partisan he gets over Trans Mountain. I mean, during his announcement on Trans Mountain, Hal, I couldn't believe this was a Government of Canada announcement about a project that started with a $4.5 billion layout of taxpayer dollars. He was flanked by cabinet ministers, and it sounded like a Liberal Party election campaign speech. We're going to see more of this over the resource sector over the next several months up until the vote in October.
Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has come out with his environmental plan and a push to reduce emissions in foreign countries. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is part of his plan that he released late Wednesday, and it's three-pronged. One is trying to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions here in Canada. He's going to do it without a carbon tax, which you'll be subject to in Alberta as of January 1st if Justin Trudeau's reelected. We're subject to it here in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, New Brunswick all have it as well. He says no, the Conservatives can meet Canada's greenhouse gas targets without a carbon tax. They'll use regulation, something the Liberals are also using as part of their plan, so they can't criticize them too much. But the interesting part is saying, look, we can have a bigger bang for our buck by trying to reduce emissions in other countries. If we could take liquefied natural gas from somewhere like British Columbia and sell it into, well, Asian markets, be it India, be it China, Indonesia, Malaysia. We know they want this product, and a lot of these countries generate much of their electricity from coal. Coal is a filthy fuel. Beyond greenhouse gas emissions, you got mercury going in the air, sulfur, lots of health problems, lots of air pollution problems. This could address those issues, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce pollution, and benefit the Canadian economy. That's one example. Also looking to get shipping, be it container ships or cruise ships, off of bunker fuel and onto liquefied natural gas, and exporting a whole bunch of other Canadian technology and know-how in an attempt to say, well, we can benefit the economy and the environment, something the current Prime Minister says we need to be doing.
A recent report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Brian, says the carbon tax must more than double for Canada to meet its 2030 Paris targets.
Yeah, and this is where their response to this, the government's response to this report, kind of gives Andrew Scheer some defensive play when it comes to releasing his own climate plan, his own environment plan, because parliamentary budget officer said, oh, $50 is too low. Remember, it started off at 10 and it goes up by $10 a year, and eventually it'll hit $50 by 2022. And the parliamentary budget officer says that's not high enough to meet Canada's Paris targets. Of course, Catherine McKenna's own Environment Canada department has said in the past it needs to be $300. Others have said it's got to be higher. The PBO simply said it's got to be at least double, $102 to $138 a ton for Canada to meet it. Well, when asked, Catherine McKenna said, oh, no, we won't raise the carbon tax after the election if we win. That won't happen. And people said, well, you said you won't meet your targets. How will you get there? And she said, regulation. Well, they've derided the idea of using regulations to reduce greenhouse gases in the past. Now they're saying that's going to be a big part of their plan. So when Andrew Scheer said on Wednesday, we can reduce it without a carbon tax, we'll use regulation, the Liberals can't turn around and attack him because that's a big part of their plan as well. So interesting times on that file.
Brian, a new poll says Canadians would be unwilling to pay as little as $9 a month extra for a clean environment. Now, does that poll surprise you a little?
No, it doesn't. And I'll tell you why, despite the fact that we've got politicians at the federal level and certain provincial legislatures and municipal chambers across the country declaring a climate emergency, which, by the way, the House of Commons did, led by the Liberals just before they announced the green light for Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's a climate emergency. Stop all the oil. Build a pipeline. A bit of cognitive dissonance there. Most people don't see it that way. Most people want a clean environment. They want to do the right thing. They want to reduce their use of fossil fuels as much as they want to reduce their use of garbage or their production of plastic waste. But they're skeptical. When you talk to pollsters, they say, look, they're skeptical that governments are going to follow through on this because we've had taxes on tires, let's say, to recycle tires or dispose of them. And the tire dumps are still there and the money piles up, but people don't see it going anywhere. And they've seen it for different products over the years. And so they are skeptical. And I think rightly so. Also, despite people giving aspirational answers to pollsters about how much the environment really does matter to them, as a ballot box issue and as a pocketbook issue, it takes a backseat to an awful lot of other things.
The Prime Minister attended the Raptors parade in Toronto on Monday, then flew to Montreal for a Liberal fundraiser. He says his party is more unified now than ever since Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott were booted from caucus. But Brian, those were two very popular ministers. Will this not hurt Trudeau come election time in October?
Well, I think it will in Vancouver, where he's going to be damaged by the approval of the pipeline and other issues as well. There's a lot that's going to be happening in Vancouver where they've got a big chunk of seats they need to keep if they want to hold their majority. But just before I talk about Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, you mentioned he flew down for the Raptors parade. I guess that was on Monday. So Monday his schedule was supposed to be meeting in Ottawa, fly to Toronto for the parade, fly back to Ottawa for another meeting, fly to Montreal for the fundraiser, fly back to Ottawa for his cabinet meeting on Tuesday. There's a bunch of flights in there for a guy who was debating a climate emergency and declaring that we've all got to do better. The Raptors parade went late, and so he, missed out on one of those flights and went straight to Montreal. I'm not sure that the Liberal Party is more united than ever. We've had more Liberal MPs announce this week they're not seeking re-election. If this was a shoo-in for them, if they felt good about where they were as a party, both in terms of the polls, in terms of their unity, you wouldn't be seeing MPs who, do 2 more years and you've got your pension, for goodness sakes. You wouldn't be seeing them say, I'm going to bow out. I'm not going to run. And he's had it happen in every region of the country. It's not just an Ontario thing in and around Jane Philpott. It's not just British Columbia. It's across the country. I don't think that's a good sign for the Prime Minister, and I don't think it says good things about where the Liberal Party is right now.
The United Nations is the latest group that wants to investigate Canada after Justin Trudeau said he accepts that our country is guilty of genocide. Should our PM not maybe have said that, Brian?
It's really starting to look that way. I would have said so at the beginning. I think it is a loaded term. I think its use in the context that it was used is false. Uses a false definition. It tries to change the definition of genocide. Did horrible things happen? Absolutely. Was this a genocide in the classic sense? No. Was it a genocide by any regular definition of the word? No. But because the Prime Minister said he accepts that, he's had the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and others say we need to look into this. So the UN's Human Rights Commissioner is going to be investigating the government of Canada on the issue of did we commit a genocide. You know, and this is just from the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry. How I was looking up murder stats the other day as I was writing about gun violence. Did you know that Aboriginal men are far more likely to be murdered in this country than Indigenous women? But it's not necessarily happening at the hands of white Canadians or Black Canadians or Asians. Often it is within their own communities. So there are real big problems out there. And debating over a word isn't going to solve those problems. It is not going to heal anything in terms of reconciliation, but it is generating an awful lot of international investigations into what our Prime Minister claimed Canada is already guilty of.
Last year, we heard about how charities and nonprofits that would not agree to the Liberals' summer jobs grant program attestation were denied funding. So, Brian, how did a group that had its charitable status revoked over terrorist financing get a job grant?
That is a major question a lot of people want answers to, because the group we're talking about is the Islamic Society of North America. You may recall this place, Hal, on the drive between Toronto and Hamilton. There is, in Mississauga, there is a giant mosque and Islamic center just on the south end of the highway, on the south end of the QEW. That's the organization that we're talking about. There have been questions about them over the years, but for Canada Revenue Agency to go in and strip them of their charitable status over allegations that they were funneling money to militants, to terrorists in Pakistan, that is a serious charge. They have not had that overturned, and yet somehow this group was given a $25,000 job grant. Why would any government department say that is a good use of taxpayers' dollars? Not when you're turning around and you're telling a Christian camp you can't get a summer job grant because your church doesn't believe in abortion on demand. That is some sick and twisted thinking. Look, I'm happy to see Islamic centers and mosques and community groups across the country, regardless of faith, get these types of summer job grants. They're important. They give kids their first chance. They give a lot of these organizations a bit of extra help. But if you have been incredibly accused to the point that your charitable status is taken away over allegations you were funding terrorism, you don't deserve a dime of taxpayers' money.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, I know. Now, we recently celebrated Tax Freedom Day. Brian, is this a holiday that many of us have never even heard of?
Well, more of us should hear about it. It happened on June the 14th, okay? And it was announced by the Fraser Institute. June the 14th is when the average Canadian family across the country stopped working for the government, started working for themselves. And what they do is they calculate all the income tax, the property tax, the fuel tax, your tax on booze and cigarettes that the average Canadian family pays. And then they say, okay, how long does it take to pay that entire tax bill? So if you were paying all your taxes all year, guess what? You would have worked from January 1st until June 14th for the average family to pay their tax bill. I have to say, it comes a little bit earlier in Alberta towards the end of May. But it used to be, in 1961, Hal, it was May 3rd. For the entire country, it was May 3rd. It's gone as late as June 25th. Under the Harper government, it rolled back to about June 10th, and now it started to creep forward due to both federal and provincial changes that have been brought in by different governments, expanding various taxes of all sorts. So it is the type of thing that people should know so that they realize, that's how much of the year I work to pay just for the government? Am I getting good value for my money? Some people are going to say yes, some will say no, but it's good information.
I like to see tax freedom years, never mind a tax freedom day, you know?
A jubilee year with no taxes.
Award-winning journalist Brian Lilly joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Thank you.
The final report has been released for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The reaction across the country and around the world has been pretty interesting, to say the least. To talk about it is Dr. John Robson. He's an invited professor at the University of Ottawa and a National Post columnist. Welcome back to BCN, John.
Thank you.
Now, John, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and many others are calling this genocide. Critics say this seems a harsh term when we normally see it reserved for situations like the mass killings in Rwanda. Your thoughts?
It seems to me it's a very unfortunate charge to have leveled, partly because it's difficult for people to contest it. But two essential elements in a genocide. One is there has to be actions that tend to wipe a people out. And second, it has to be deliberate and malicious. And I think that although the situation of Canadian Aboriginals is in many ways very difficult, and the past history is tragic, and there are elements of malice, no Canadian government ever set itself the objective of wiping out First Nations. And the fact that the report said the genocide was ongoing, that is to say that Justin Trudeau and his administration are engaged in genocide, is surely not just preposterous, but deeply offensive. There is so much goodwill, so much desire to change the trajectory, to right the wrongs of the past to the extent that we can, to fix the problems in the present. Canadians are horrified by the situation under which so many Aboriginals live, including that so many are exposed to violence. And it seems to me that calling it genocide isn't just wrong, it's a gratuitous insult. It says that Canadians hate Aboriginals, and it tells Aboriginals the rest of Canadians just hate you, they want to wipe you out. And this is a terrible thing to say, and it seems to me too, it's in the antithesis of the spirit of reconciliation.
John, a Leger poll revealed that 53% of respondents agreed that the tragedy is part of an ongoing genocide that has been centuries in the making, but another 34% disagreed. Any idea what it is that is still ongoing to consider it a genocide?
I am baffled by this finding. Again, I know people don't want to seem insensitive by saying, no, it's not that. And I know people are very upset at the condition under which many Aboriginals live. But the archetypal genocide is the Holocaust. Nazi authorities deliberately round up all the Jews they can get their hands on, pack them in cattle cars, and send them to extermination camps, many of which, places like Majdanek, there aren't even barracks. Your life expectancy is 45 minutes. Maybe at some time in the United States, there was a feeling we'll put them on reservations where they will die off, that there was some sort of sense that we're going to get rid of these people. But in Canada, that's never been government policy. People like Sir John A. Macdonald, who was enlightened for his time, thought we've got to do something to help these people survive. The residential schools, what everyone thinks of the result, were expressly set up so that Aboriginals would acquire the skills that would protect them from disappearing. And again, you look back, where is the malice? Where is the deliberate killing? Some people think, well, there was a certain hostility to Aboriginal culture. And some people would say, well, a genocide could involve simply erasing the ethnic identity without killing the individuals. But to me, again, I don't know what people think they're saying when you compare it to what happened in Rwanda, where people are going around with machetes, grabbing members of an ethnic group and hacking them horribly to bits. That's what genocide looks like. And in Canada, I mean, the main thing that killed Aboriginals in the New World was diseases. And people say, oh, Jeffrey Amherst and his smallpox blankets. And the real demographic catastrophe, something like 90% of the inhabitants of the Americas died from European diseases in the 2 centuries after contact. But most of those who died never saw a European. The waves of illness traveled through the populace in ways that nobody planned, and nobody could have stopped if they had known what was happening. It's a terrible thing, but a genocide? And today, of course, Canadians are hugely sympathetic. Any policy that you say, well, this is going to help Aboriginals, like, oh, great, give them Trans Mountain Pipeline. Hey, economic development, wouldn't that be wonderful? People aren't going around saying, oh, no, we want to get those Indians. There's nobody talking like that. So how can there be an ongoing genocide when everybody is really heartbroken at the situation and determined to make it better for these people? Genocides happen when you hate people. They don't happen when you love them.
The report also stated that acts of violence stem from colonialism and are coupled with racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. Now, can you explain where exactly homophobia and transphobia are contributing to the violence?
It seems to me that they just took the politically correct checklist. I mean, they wrote one of those reports that you could have written before you did the study, and that a sarcastic critic could have written before you produced your result. One of the things that's very strange about this, well, there are two things. First of all, if you're really concerned about Aboriginal victims of violence, why aren't you looking at missing and murdered men and boys? Because there are a lot more of them. And secondly, if you're concerned about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, why don't you ask who's killing them? Because as with murder everywhere, at all times and in all places, the majority of people who are murdered by people they know quite well. And very often it's intimate violence. And of course, one of the reasons they didn't want to look at this is because they know that the average Indigenous woman who gets murdered is murdered by a partner who's also Aboriginal. And you can say, yes, but all the violence in the community comes from colonialism and so on. And to some extent, you would have a point. Yes, there's a lot of social dysfunction that comes from the incredible disruption of the collision between European and Aboriginal culture. And you can point and say, had Columbus sunk, had no one ever come, maybe things would be different. But you can't go back and sink Columbus. You have to deal with the situation as it is. And to suggest that it stems from malevolence and colonialism and racism and bigotry, I mean, not that there aren't bigots in this world, but again, homophobia, whatever menace it may present to some homosexuals, if you look at the degree of acceptance and enthusiasm, if you don't march in a pride parade as a politician, you're a nobody in this town. The idea that there is this rampant, official, pervasive, deadly homophobia out there, and that the main problem in Aboriginal communities is homophobia. This to me is just somebody picked up a college textbook and photocopied it. They didn't look at the situation on the ground and say, who is killing these women and these girls? Why? And what could we do practically to stop it, instead of saying how great we are because we have a rainbow flag?
Now, the inquiry found that Indigenous women suffer from a higher rate of violence and murders than the general population. Do we actually have clear numbers on that, John?
We do have clear numbers on that, and they're scary. Yes, and they also, Indigenous women and girls are murdered at a far higher rate than non-Indigenous women and girls. Indigenous men and boys are also murdered at a far higher rate than non-Indigenous men and boys. And it is true that the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous women is greater even than the gap between non-Indigenous and Indigenous men. So we do have good numbers on that. I mean, they're accurate numbers, I should say. They're terrible numbers, but they're accurate. We do know that there is an epidemic of violence in Aboriginal communities. But what the inquiry doesn't really tell us is, how do we make this stop? I mean, this long list of politically correct demands, it's not a practical program. And it's like, they've had this situation in American inner cities, you do polls of Black residents of poor neighborhoods, and they say, we're not happy with the policing. But if you ask them, what's the problem? They say, there aren't police around. Help, would you please send some cops to arrest the criminals? The practical idea that we should save lives one by one until there's a lot fewer people getting killed, and then we'll fix colonialism. It seems to me very unfortunate that they didn't have a more practical eye to fixing the problem, instead of saying, oh, well, structural this, and, we'll have re-education for police and that sort of thing. I mean, let me ask you a blunt question. Would you want to be a non-Aboriginal police officer assigned to one of these remote communities when you're the agent of a genocidal regime, and that's what they're telling the people there? How are you going to investigate, find problems before they erupt into lethality, and do something effective about it? Because that's what the victims need. First and foremost, they need not to be murdered. Everything else that's going to happen that'll be any good for them depends first and foremost on that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we do hear that often, that it's Indigenous on Indigenous when it comes to the murders. In many states in the United States, it's black on black crime. So how do we solve those issues? Is a lot of it to do with education, getting into those communities?
Well, I mean, I'll take the American example first. If you want to get rid of most of the inner city violence in the United States, you would legalize drugs, because so much of that violence is security issues surrounding the drug trade. But in terms of Aboriginal communities, what's killing people there, directly and indirectly, I think more than anything, is hopelessness and despair. And you have to create economic opportunities. And I don't think you do that by saying, well, things were great 500 years ago. We need to get back to that, because the 21st century is upon us, whether we like it or not, Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. There's a lot that I don't like about the modern world, but I can't make it go away by going, boo, down with you, modernity. And the idea that we can fix this problem without people having private sector jobs, self-supporting, self-respecting. So resource development is very important because for a lot of these communities. I mean, don't forget, a lot of Aboriginals live in cities, but a lot of them do live in places where the sorts of jobs that most Canadians get just don't exist. Resources need to be developed, and these anti-pipeline protesters saying, oh, all Aboriginals are with us. That's not true at all. A lot of Aboriginal communities are saying, oh, please, a pipeline, jobs for our people, as carpenters, as electricians, all the kind of things that happen when construction and maintenance go on. This more than anything, because when people talk about the ways of the ancestors, I'll tell you one thing about the ways of the ancestors that I think doesn't get enough emphasis. They supported themselves. They had a tough life. They didn't have a lot of technology. Northern Canada's kind of a hostile environment, but they got a living out of it, and they came home at the end of the day knowing they'd done it themselves. And nothing is going to fix the problems, all the problems, from violence to substance abuse, except getting that feeling back that we are, in fact, making our own lives work.
Yeah, the opioid crisis has hit many regions across Canada, including the reserves too. Many of the tribes that we've spoken to, a lot of the Aboriginal community. John, does this inquiry provide any solutions to violence against Indigenous women and girls?
I mean, it's such a grab bag. I mean, you can go through hundreds of recommendations. I'm sure there's some stuff that will help. But fundamentally, it's just same old, same old. And in a few years, they'll do another one, and it'll say the same thing. If they actually issued the same report, I don't know how many people would notice that they hadn't, make a few cosmetic changes. I think that the things that people won't talk about, the deadening effect of welfare dependency, the need to break the cycle, which is unfortunately very real in a lot of Aboriginal communities, fetal alcohol syndrome, and young people who just don't understand consequences. And to think we have got to change things so that we produce a generation of young Aboriginals that can make it in the modern world, that have the skills that you need in the 21st century. And if they have some special wisdom to do with the environment and some particular connection with nature, I mean, I'm happy for them, but share it with us because we all need that. But at the same time, stop dwelling upon past grievances and a way of life that whatever its merits and whatever its drawbacks is gone and can't come back. You have got to get away. Thomas Sowell once said that victimization sits on your shoulder whispering that you're damaged goods. And the more you tell Aboriginals, oh, well, colonialism did it to you, the more they think, well, I can't do anything. I was colonized. As opposed to saying, you know what? If I had a choice, maybe I wouldn't be starting from here, but I am here. And what was it? Arthur Ashe said, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And that, I find that mentality missing from these reports in a way that I think is tragic. Why not a call to Aboriginals themselves? I will not hit my partner. I'm going to stop the cycle of violence in this house myself. And again, I'll cite the first great American Black leader after slavery, Booker T. Washington, very much a preacher of the gospel of self-help. And Washington said, look, we're in a mess that white people put us in. They enslaved us. They denied us education. They called us dirty names. Yeah, it's their fault we're in the condition we're in right now. But they're not going to fix it for us, and they can't fix it for us even if they wanted to. We must pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And I think we need more of that message. We're not asking you to say, yeah, it's our fault, we're here. It's not. But we're asking you to say, we may not be the problem, but we're the solution. And that, I think, is what you really, and to look them in the eye and say, not only should you do it, but we know you can do it. Because there is a message of helplessness often in these reports, which I think is enormously destructive, though well-meaning.
So, John, one of the allegations is that police do not put the same effort and resources into finding the perpetrators of these crimes and bringing them to justice as compared to crimes against the general population. Any truth to that?
I think there may at one time have been some truth to it. I do not think there is much truth to it now. And I think I would ask people, that's such a nasty thing to say about the police. Oh, you don't care if an Indian gets murdered. Put yourselves in the boots of an RCMP officer in one of these detachments with this kind of circumstance going on. How much cooperation do they get from the community? How clear an idea do they have of who probably did it? And how difficult is it to get evidence? Would you take on that job? And if you did take on that job, do you think you could improve the rate at which we solve these crimes? Because, I mean, this sort of back seat of the cruiser driving to say, oh, they could fix this if they wanted to. They're just a bunch of nasty bigots. How many people choose a career in policing and a career in policing in that part of Canada because they don't care what happens to Aboriginals? I think it's a terribly mean-spirited thing to say. And I think that there's probably a lot of frustration among the police. And this sure isn't going to help them to be more effective in getting this done. It's heartbreaking. You send people into these communities, they come back in tears sometimes over what they've seen. And if you then say to them, well, you're just a callous white bigot, that is so unfair to them, and it's so unhelpful in terms of finally doing something about this problem that is so heartbreaking and that has gone on for generations.
Dr. John Robson, an invited professor at the University of Ottawa and a National Post columnist, thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at PCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great day.